Chapter 10. Preparations. It was a week until the wedding. Peter and Ophelia were in a boudoir talking. "Are you prepared for the wedding?" Ophelia asked. "Are you?" he asked back. "I mean, not so much," she admitted. "I guess I am, but I don't feel like I am," she told him. "I'm the same," he said. "I know what to do, where to be, what to say, but I do not feel ready." Ophelia nodded. "You are still grieving," she said, "so it will be much harder to feel ready." He nodded. "It is meant to be a happy day. I don't want to be sad. If I can, just for the one day, be positive and optimistic, then that will be enough," he said. "I agree." She took his hand. "I think I could do it," he said, "if I try to get in the right headspace." "I believe you can." She looked right at him. "You are strong. Stronger than you think you are." She gave him an encouraging look. He gave a small smile. "Thank you." He paused. "I really hate my father. However, he did bring me you." He looked at Ophelia. "Just one small miracle amidst all the terrible things he has done." Ophelia blushed at such a compliment. Peter was about to continue, when the door opened rather suddenly. "Ophelia!" a young boy shouted as he entered the room. Ophelia jumped up from her seat. "William!" They rushed together and gripped one another in a tight hug. He was 10 years old and as tall as her collarbone. He had brown hair, but freckles across his cheeks and nose, like her. "I've missed you," he spoke, squashed in her hug. "I have missed you too," she said, and let go of the hug, proceeding to kiss his head many times, which made him laugh. An older lady, who was William's nanny, entered the room, looking a little flustered. She breathed heavily. "William, you must not run like that. I cannot keep up with you," she told him. "I had to see Ophelia," he responded. He turned back to Ophelia, whose eyes had filled with tears upon seeing her little brother. "Why are you crying?" he asked her, worried. "I'm just so happy to see you," she told him, and hugged him again, squeezing him tight. "Ow!" his muffled voice said. Peter could not help but chuckle. He stood up to introduce himself. "Hello, Master William," he said. William looked excited. "Prince Peter!" he said excitedly. "William," the lady said from the doorway, "remember you must bow when meeting the prince." William was about to, but Peter took his shoulder gently. "No need, you're going to be family," he said. "Sadly, you will still have to do so at formal occasions." William smiled. Peter then added, "Although my father will still expect a bow, so keep that in mind." Ophelia went with William to help him settle in. Countess Giovanna went as well, to see her son and lend a hand. Towards the evening, Ophelia and William came to the dining room to eat. Only Peter was there. "Where is everyone else?" Ophelia asked. "I think they didn't want us to eat together anymore," Peter told her. Ophelia understood and sat down, as did William. They spoke together as they ate. "You know, Peter," Ophelia began, "William is very interested in weaponry, especially swords." Peter looked over to William. "Is that so?" he said, and William gave a little nod. "Well, how would you like it if tomorrow I took you down to our armory and weapons room? Maybe even learn some sword fighting with the training swords." William looked very excited. "Yes, please!" He bounced in his chair. "If that's all right with Ophelia, of course," Peter added. William looked eagerly at Ophelia. "As long as I can come too," she said. Both Peter and William nodded. She smiled. "Should be fun," she said. Peter woke up groggy. He had spent the night alone, and hadn't slept too well, but he felt somewhat rested. He shifted over to his wardrobe, and changed into a plain shirt and breeches. Out of his window, he saw the rosebush blooming and breathed. He opened one of his drawers. He had placed all the photos in there, underneath a pile of letters. He had 2 of the same photo, from the work pictures he had prompted. He took one of them, and placed it on the windowsill that was directly in front of the rosebush, and placed a paperweight on one of the corners. Peter went outside into the small garden, and sat down in front of the rosebush. "Only a week to go now," he spoke to the plant. I don't feel ready at all. I'm still hurting a lot. I don't feel like it will ever go away. People tell me it will, and I know that. It's just so hard to believe when I'm in so much pain. He looked at the ground. If you were here, you would know what to do. But if you were here, I wouldn't need help because I wouldn't be grieving. Tears fell from his eyes onto the ground. I know you said if you weren't here, it would be easier for the marriage to go smoothly. But this is not what you meant. Peter sniffled. I wish you could be here to enjoy the day with us. Although maybe that would have been painful for you, and I wouldn't want it to have caused you pain. He looked at the bloomed rose. I miss you, James, he said. How can I go on without you? Who are you talking to? A voice came from behind Peter, making him jump. He turned quickly. Oh! He exclaimed loudly. William jumped and stepped back. Sorry, he said. I didn't mean to scare you. Peter stood up. No, it's all right. He wiped the tears from his eyes. William watched. Were you upset? William asked. Yes. Peter thought it was better to be honest. Why were you sad? William asked him. Oh, someone I was close to died recently, Peter told him. I am still upset. Oh, William said, and was quiet for a moment. My father died, William said. I was only 3, but it was still sad, and Ophelia still gets upset about it sometimes, he told Peter. Peter nodded. I know, she told me. He took a deep breath to calm himself. Don't worry, he said. It won't change our trip to the armory. We'll still have fun, he told William. William smiled. That's good. I'm excited. Peter smiled too. Come on, let's get some breakfast. He walked with William to the dining hall. Peter, William, and Ophelia were in the palace armory. Peter was showing William the different makes of swords that they kept. And lastly, Peter said, we have this beauty. He took a large curved sword from a stand. This is a Dada sword. Holding it carefully, he showed it to William. This would be used for close combat with untrained soldiers, rather than a proper sword fight. So, it could be used in a battle? William asked. Exactly, Peter said. It looks a bit like a pirate sword, Ophelia added. I suppose it does, Peter agreed. But that would be a cutlass, right? William asked. Yes, Peter told him. William grinned. Clever clocks, Ophelia said, and William giggled. Peter took William into the training ground to teach him swordsmanship. Ophelia decided to watch from the sides. Before he taught William anything, he secretly handed him something. Now, before any good duel, it is good to hand your lady something for luck. Most men give her a kerchief, but I prefer something a little more beautiful. He walked over to Lady Ophelia and bowed low, holding out a white rose. A rose for my lady? He said. She smiled and took the rose. Thank you, very pretty. She sniffed the rose. It smelt lovely. William walked over to Lady Ophelia and did the same thing with the flower Peter had given him. A rose for my lady? She took the flower. This isn't a rose, William, she said. He looked up. It was a small purple flower he had handed her. I think it's a viola, she told him. Oh. William bowed again. A viola for my lady, he said. She giggled. Thank you, Ophelia said. A couple of knights came over to the training ground. Peter, one of them said. Peter paused his teaching with William and wiped his forehead of sweat. He saw it was 2 knights named Sir Julian and Sir Leonard. Who's this young knight? Sir Leonard asked. I am Lord William of Lechlade, William said, moving the training sword as if he was stabbing something. I see, the knight replied. Is he any good? Sir Julian asked. He is, Peter told them. Do you want to have a go with me? Julian offered William. William looked at Ophelia for the answer. If you want to, she told him. He nodded. Julian and William had an easy sword fight. William was rather good to say he'd only practiced for a couple of hours. Sir Julian congratulated him. Is there anyone else you want to practice with before we stop? Peter asked him. Sir Leonard was about to step out to fight, but William pointed to Ophelia. Peter laughed nervously. "I don't think that's going to happen," Peter said. Ophelia ducked under the wooden fence. "I've been watching you two all morning. I'm sure I can do something," she said. Peter reluctantly handed her his training sword, and she tucked her skirts up so she could step easier. William used the moves that Peter had taught him to try and tag her, but she was able to defend herself well. Peter watched, confused. William finally tagged her, but it looked like she had let him. She was about to give her sword back when Peter stepped out. "Hold on a moment," he said. "Can I use that sword, William?" William handed Peter his training sword and went to stand with the knights. Ophelia watched as Peter came to stand in front of her. "May I have this fight, my lady?" he asked her. "You may," she said. They got into position and began. Peter began with a few simple movements he had taught to William, but slowly became more advanced, until the two of them were in an intense sword fight. The knights and William watched, stunned. The fight ended up when Ophelia managed to knock Peter down and gently tap him on the shoulder with her sword. He looked up at her, completely astonished. "You should be a knight," he breathed. She smiled and helped him up. "Where on earth did you learn to do that?" he asked. She looked out of breath. "My father taught me," she said, trying to catch her breath. "I didn't think I'd remember it so well." She wiped her brow. "That was amazing!" William ran over to her. The two knights applauded. "Brilliant!" they cheered. Ophelia giggled. "I don't think I'll make a habit of it," she told them. "But it was fun," she said. "Well, we had better be heading in," Peter said. "Don't want to get heat stroke." He, Ophelia, and William went back into the palace, leaving the two knights to train together. 3 days until the wedding. Peter looked out of the solar windows. Strings of lights were being hung up, and white flowers had been delivered to be planted. He could see the white flowers in a cart. It should have been James planting those flowers and hanging the lights. He didn't know who was doing it now, but frankly, he didn't want to know. He saw a carriage arriving, and a group of 4 girls got out. He cringed seeing the girls. They reminded him of all the doll-faced ladies he'd been forced to dance and dine with leading up till now. After a few minutes, he heard high-pitched voices outside the room. It made him anxious. The door opened suddenly, and 5 people walked in. One of them was Ophelia, and the others were the 4 girls he had seen exiting the carriage. He didn't say anything or move, just watched them. Ophelia was the only one of them, to Peter, that looked like a real person. "I've never seen a palace so big," one girl said. "It's all so stunning," another chimed in. "I am so jealous of you, Ophelia," another girl spoke. "Oh my God!" One of them spotted Peter. He smiled awkwardly. All 4 of them curtsied so suddenly that for a moment he thought they'd all collapsed. When they stood back up, he had got up from his chair. "Peter, this is Mary Louise, Geneva, Hope, and Jane," she introduced. "Nice to meet you," Peter said, even though he would have preferred to be alone. Ophelia realised he was uncomfortable. "Were you busy? We can go to a different room," she said, so that he could say yes, and they could leave. "I wasn't—" he began, but one of the ladies butted in. "Of course not! He was just resting here," she said to Ophelia. "I think we should all get to know each other." She walked to Peter and sat him down. Peter's hair flopped into his face. He was too confused to object. Then he was surrounded by the other girls, including a stressed Ophelia. They all spoke over each other. "Is it true that the wedding cost over £1,000,000? Peter didn't pick up a single sentence of what had been said. "I'd much rather be by myself at the moment," he told them. "Nonsense!" one of them said, and about 4 hands grabbed at his clothes to stop him from leaving. They all began talking over each other again, and he still couldn't decipher what anyone was saying. "Peter!" A familiar voice came from nearby. They all looked over to see Queen Lillian. All the girls stood up and curtsied to her. She smiled and continued. "I need you now. It's important," she said. Peter almost sprung off his chair to get away. As he left the room with his mother, he asked, "What is it that's so important?" "Your sanity," she replied. "You're welcome." He smiled. "You have to have supper with them this evening. You shouldn't have to endure them until then. she told him. "Why does Ophelia have to deal with them, though?" he asked. "Those are her bridesmaids." Peter was stunned that Ophelia could put up with those girls, but maybe that was why she was so strong, and maybe that was how she'd managed to slip onto his father's radar in his hunt for a wife to marry Peter. Prince Peter managed to endure the evening with the girls, as they asked him an array of different questions. He had a headache by the end of the night, but he was happy that it helped him fall asleep easier than he had been doing. It was the day before the wedding. Peter and Ophelia were in the church with the Archbishop. Peter and Ophelia were being talked through the service by the Archbishop, while William practiced walking up and down the aisle with his nanny, so that he would walk Ophelia down correctly. They spent the whole morning there, making sure they were clear on what was happening. Ophelia left with William and the nanny, while Peter stayed behind to ask the Archbishop a few questions. Countess Giovanna moved Lady Ophelia's ringlets out of her face. "Look at you," she said. "My little girl, about to be a bride." Ophelia smiled. "Your father would be so proud of you." "I wish he were here," Ophelia said. "We all do, but he's always in our hearts," Countess Giovanna reminded her. William slipped his hand into Ophelia's, and she squeezed it lovingly. "It's going to be perfect," he told her. "Of course it is," she looked at him. "Especially because you'll be there to walk me down the aisle." He grinned. "But I will have to sleep by myself at night now," he said sadly. "But that is what you do at home, William," Countess Giovanna said. "But I missed Ophelia," William said. He had slept in her room every night he had been in the palace. "I will try my very best not to leave for so long without seeing you again. I had to this time, to make sure I was all right here," Ophelia told him. "You missed my birthday," William said sadly. "I know, but I sent you letters and a birthday gift." William nodded and returned to the subject of sleeping. "I don't understand why I can't still sleep in your room. Peter likes me too." Ophelia's eyes widened, and she looked to her mother for a suitable answer. Giovanna pulled him towards her. "Because people who have just got married like to have time to themselves," she told him. He didn't understand why, but didn't argue. "Fine," he sulked. "Don't be upset, William," Ophelia tried to cheer him up. "Can I see you in your amazing suit before tomorrow? I'll be too nervous to appreciate it then." He took her hand and rushed her over to his suit. It was evening. Guests who were coming from afar had been arriving all day. Peter had to go to his parents' before going to bed, but stopped by the small garden before going. He had blocked it off so that people could not wander in randomly. He kneeled in front of the rose bush, pink rose still there, looking pretty. "Tomorrow, James," Peter began. "I'm going to be getting married. The gardens look nice. I think you would have made them look better. The hedges aren't in the shape of animals. They've just been made to look smooth." He looked at the rose. "I will have to do things that I never did with you," he said sadly. "I don't know how to feel about that," he said. "I don't know how you would feel about it either, but there's not much I can do about that." We connected on a much more emotional level though, didn't we? Our spirits were intertwined, and that can never change, even if I do fall in love with Ophelia. He felt a calm fall over him. "I'll tell you how it goes when I'm back from the honeymoon." He stood up, then took the rose gently between his fingers, then leaned down to kiss it. Its soft petals felt nice against his lips. He smiled and went inside. The calm feeling went away when Peter saw his father. However, his father seemed to have got the point that Peter didn't really want to speak to him, as Queen Lillian did most of the talking. She made sure that he was clear on the plan for tomorrow, and that he had the clothing that was required to wear. He confirmed everything with her. She gave him a hug, after all the formalities had been taken care of. "I will see you tomorrow. Sleep well, darling," she said, and gave him a kiss on the cheek. He thanked her, and moved so he was before his father. There was a tension. "I will see you tomorrow," the king spoke. "Yes," Peter said. "I shall see you tomorrow." He repeated his father. His father gave him a handshake, and then Peter left.